Hi everybody, it's Franny and we're back working on the 86 3.2 Carrera. Well, we haven't been having great luck, have we? The engine is it's actually running worse than it was. But in the last episode, we ended up checking the coil, and I have to admit, I feel really dumb. I didn't check the secondary part of the coil correctly. So we're gonna start with that today, but I have a full list of a bunch of stuff I wanna check on the car. We're gonna go through everything very methodically and just check everything in here and try to find our problem. We'll perform the test on the coil again. All right, so across the two terminals here, which is the primary, we should see a very, very low, less than 1 ohm resistance. All right, hook this guy up. And there we are, 0.5 ohms, and that's what we got last time. The spec is 0.4 to 0.7, so we're well within that range. Looks pretty good there. Let's check our secondary. So when I read the spec for this out of the manual, it said 5 to 8.7 kiloohms. And that was my problem, was I thought it meant 5 ohms to 8.7 kiloohms. What it really meant was 5 kiloohms to 8.7 kiloohms. And I should know that. Duh. The secondary in a coil is quite a bit more wire than the primary. That's how the voltage multiplication happens. So there's quite a bit more wire, there'd be quite a bit more resistance, kind of duh. I missed that. I very much apologize. And the next thing to do on my meter here is to set this up to the next level. It's not an auto range meter. All right, but it will still do this just fine. So to measure the resistance on the secondary, we want pins 15 and the center here, which is pin 4. So we can clamp on here, great, and let's see what we get. All right, 5.7 kiloohms. Yeah, just about 6.697, blah, blah, blah. So the spec for this is 5 to 8.7 kiloohms, and that puts us very close to the low end of the spec for this coil. And what does that mean? Well, why would the resistance be lower on the secondary coil? Well, the only thing I can think of is it's possible that some of the windings have fused together, effectively making the total coil length shorter, which would reduce its resistance. So it's possible there's a few in here that have been sort of fused together. That's kind of a thing, and so as that secondary resistance goes down, the spark gets weaker and weaker because there's just less coil in there to produce that spark. All right, well, I just got this morning. This is a brand new coil, and a lot of you said, you know, those silver coils are kind of crappy and you can't really trust them. And I'm really hoping that this black coil was going to be perfect for us, but it is really low in the spec. Let's go ahead and run the exact same tests on this new silver coil and see what we get. We're going to check the primary, see what it looks like. All right, 0.6, that looks great. 0.5, just like the black coil. Awesome. Let's go ahead and check the secondary. Let's see what we get with this one. 6.4544 or so. Quite a bit better, I think, actually. That's a lot, actually. Almost 1,000 ohm difference between the black coil and the new coil. It does make me wonder if this black coil is really on the fritz. Another thing about coils, and something that somebody wrote in the comment section below that was really, really helpful, said that you have to be very careful not to run your ignition system with a spark plug wire off. And the reason is that the coil charges up but then has nowhere to go, and the secondary voltage can go up to 40,000 volts or so, and it's pretty rough on that teeny little coil that's in there, so it's really a bad idea. I didn't know that, actually. This is something I learned. I never knew that was really going to damage the coil. I only did it for a short fraction of a second, and I don't think it's too bad for that. But a couple years ago when I was driving the car, I did notice that the #1 spark plug lead was loose. So it wasn't completely seated all the way on the spark plug. And it's kind of a weird thing with how short that is and how it kind of got stuck on that side. Long story, but it was off a little bit. And I'm wondering if maybe that had started some damage on the coil. It's very possible. Well, at this point, I guess we need to decide, are we going to install the new silver coil, or keep with the old black coil. And I think what I want to do, just to take the old black coil completely out of the equation, is to install the new silver coil. We're still going to perform a few more tests in here, do a few more things. We'll start the car and see where we are. I want to take a minute or so to thank all of you so much for all of your comments. They've been super helpful, and I got a ton of them. I read them all. I tried to respond to as many as I could, but thank you so much, and you all gave me great ideas to look at, and I wrote them all down. So on your list of things to look at were grounds. We're going to go back through and clean all of our grounds again. The mass airflow sensor, that's this guy over here. That's going to be our next task. Speed sensor. Well, that's these guys back here, and they're kind of, you have to get to them from the backside, underside of the car. They've all been replaced, the position, the speed sensor, and the temperature sensor. But we will go through and verify their resistance and make sure that they're happy. A vacuum test. Well, I'm pretty certain the vacuum lines are all hooked. I've looked at them 100 times and they look pretty good back there, but we will perform a vacuum test if we can't get this thing to go, because that's very much a possibility. Somebody mentioned a small crack on one of there's a little temperature sensor back there with a little vacuum line on it, and a small crack in that could cause a leak as well. So we'll double check the vacuum and the rotor and distributor as well. Somebody was saying, you know, it's possible that the rotor could have a problem. It could be shorting out or something. And that is very possible. I put a new rotor in another car and it just didn't work. I actually had to put the old one back in to get it to work. So all these were really helpful. There were a few others as well. We've got a long list of things to go through. So just a few house cleaning things. I'm going to get to those grounds. Let's go ahead and clean our grounds first. We'll start with that. And then after we get those done, we will get to that airflow meter. I'm all set up to check our airflow meter. The two pins in the center of the connector are hooked to a rheostat on that vane back there. We should see a very smooth movement through the resistance. Let's see what we got. All right, we're starting at about 600 ohms or so. This is Franny from the future, and I want to speed things up a little bit here. But the long and the short of it is I'm using the method from the Bentley manual, and all they said was that it should have a smooth resistance change as you move the vane. There, that's all the way open. And it's at 140 ohms. Then as we close it, goes back up to 800, 900. The thing is that it's kind of an interesting resistive change. It starts at a low resistance, then gets up to a higher resistance about halfway, and then it drops off again as you get it completely open. And you can see it as it's coming back. We settle back in again at 600. Go all the way open. And the resistance doesn't seem to follow a linear path, but it is smooth, if that makes any sense. Well, I didn't really expect that. That seems a little strange to me, but the Bentley book wasn't very specific. All it said was as you move the vane, you should see the resistance change just smoothly. It's really all they said. Now, the actual manual for the car, the Porsche manual for the car, talks about hooking up the actual connector to it, turning the ignition on, and checking the voltage as it changes. Because now we've got power to it, and we can check the voltage, and I think I want to do that. But before we leave this, and before we put the connector back on, we also have a temperature sensor, and that's the two pins on the outside. So let's go ahead and hook to that and see what we've got. So across our temperature sensor here, and this is just an open air, fresh air temperature sensor on this. We're reading 3.62K, which is within the range. Cold, like 32 degrees, would be 4.4K, and if it was good and hot out, say like 105 degrees Fahrenheit, it would be 1.3K. And it's cold out right now. It's in the 40s. So that looks about right. 3.62 sounds good. It's within the range, so I think our temperature sensor is fine. I think what I want to do though is put the connector back on, turn on the power. We're going to pull the boot back on the connector, and we'll check the voltage and see how it's doing. All right, we should see 260 millivolts when it's closed. So that's pretty close there. 254 millivolts. That looks pretty good. I'm on my 2-volt scale here. And it should be 4.6 volts when it's all the way open. There we go. 4.46. So looks good. See, look at this. It's nice and smooth. Doesn't look like it's jumping all over the place. 2.7654. Yeah, coming down, coming down. 1.8, 1.7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. And back down. Well, our airflow meter actually looks really good. Let me go ahead and turn the car off. With our airflow meter, seems like it's working well, and our temperature sensor in there. What I'm gonna do next is reinstall the back of the air box. And the reason is, check this out. It sort of moves a little bit. There's really not a lot holding it on. There's one bracket here, but it can kind of, see, it can kind of move around a little bit. And I wondered when the car was running if maybe it was vibrating a little bit. Well, the rest of the mounts are actually the back of the air box here. So let's go ahead and put this back in. I think that's really gonna, at least it's gonna eliminate the possibility of it bouncing around. With that back on, look at this. No movement really at all. And before, it was sort of sitting almost down here. It was almost sitting on top of the intake manifold. So I think that's going to be an improvement. All right, well, we've replaced our coil, we checked our airflow meter, we put a few things back in. I think at this point, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and start the car and get a baseline, see where we are. I don't want to go too far ahead before I start the car because I'll never know exactly what it was that fixed it if we fix it. That's kind of a big if. Let's go ahead and start the car and see where it is. Sure sounds a lot better, huh? Yeah, it's pretty cold out today. It's in the upper 30s, low 40s, I would say. I'm just gonna let it idle a little bit. I'm not hearing any of the missing, any of the drop though at all, huh? Well, look at that. That's interesting, huh? I haven't heard a single falter, skip, jump at all. Wow, huh? That's a pretty smooth idle, too. I have to be completely honest, I didn't expect that. I kind of expected we were going to continue on with quite a few things, and we will check some more stuff, but... Oh, look at that. Sounds great. Look at our deck lid here, barely moving. This is very smooth. Boy, and just settling right into a nice idle. Look at that. Boy, it seems so much happier now. Wow, do you think it was the coil? Or do you think it was the airbox bumping around? I don't know, huh? Take a look at our idle there. Right at 800, right where it should be. Right on the mark. Wow. That's great. Oil pressure looks good. Yeah, boy, it's running perfectly. All right, let me go ahead and turn it off. So what about the DME relay? We also thought that might be an issue. Now this is it, and I took it out of its little protective cover, and the circuit board on the back, do you see kind of whitish there? Looks a little weird. It also Smells pretty bad as well, but I think what that white stuff is leftover cleaner to clean the flux of the board. So I don't think it's really a product of it actually running. I did see one solder joint up here I wasn't super happy with, but all in all, I think the relay looked good. The contacts were kind of a little bit used. This is a 2001, so it's almost 20 years old at this point. I did go ahead and order a new DME relay, as I said I would, so we'll have a backup. And to be honest, I threw the new one in because I had this one out and I didn't want to pop this back into the cover. It's kind of a pain to get out. I was going to test the DME relay. I was going to put a camera on this and show you, with the camera running and the car going, if any of these contacts look like they were moving or disconnecting or anything, because that would totally cause, the fuel pump to shut down and could really kill the engine. And that's totally what we were hearing, huh? So when I had the engine running and it was running perfectly, I thought for a second, oh, that's right, I have the new DME relay in. Well, I went back and swapped the new one out and put the old one back in, started the car, and it's still running perfectly. So it wasn't the DME relay after all, but now I've got a new DME relay, and that's great because this coil up here, this top coil, it looks like the lacquer might be kind of going a little bad on it. It's a little different color than the one below it. It gets pretty warm when this thing's running, so I think it's definitely time to swap this guy out. Now, I guess it's possible, me taking it apart and fussing with it, and kind of playing with the contacts a little bit. I didn't clean anything, but I did sort of play with the contacts a little bit. Maybe I cleaned it up a little bit doing that. I don't know. I still don't think it was the DME relay. All this points to the coil. Strangely enough, I really didn't think it was the coil, but we did see that low resistance value on the secondary coil, so maybe it's just starting to die. And maybe since I had that spark plug over here that was popped out and kind of just not really connected for probably longer than I'd like to admit, maybe that was the cause of the degradation of the coil in the first place. Well, at this point, I think I'm going to button a few things up on the engine. What I really want to do is go ahead and get the car down and go for a drive and really feel how it feels now that I think the engine is actually running properly. With the engine running really well, our next step was to take the car out for a proper shakedown drive. But I'm going to leave that for the next episode because, okay, well, check this out.
Maybe it's not fixed.
So obviously we have a few more things to do on the engine, which we'll get to in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below and I'll get right to them. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that now. Hit the little bell next to it to be notified because obviously we've got a bit more to do on this car and then we're going to be moving to the Ferrari after that. So you're not going to want to miss any of that. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. And as always, a very special thank you to our Patreon supporters. Until next time, safe travels. Bye.